G'day again guys, and thank you for joining me. So today's drawing is a little bit of an extension of my last video. Now I had so much fun with those new pan pastels that I really wanted to keep playing and see what else I could do with them. My goal this time around was to tackle a more difficult and much more detailed subject. Now in my owl, I chose an image with some very similar colours throughout. The owl really is just a series of greys and browns in different tones, so I knew I didn't have to worry too much about accidentally muddying things up with the rather large sponge applicators and the loose pigments of the pan pastel. After playing around with that first piece and really loving the results, I wanted to know if I was going to be able to create a piece with a lot more contrast, and would I be able to lay down areas of vastly different and even complementary colours close to each other without having them accidentally blend together and creating a complete mess of colour on my page. I chose an image of a kingfisher to practice with. The kingfisher has some lovely orange and blue feathers that sit quite close to each other, as well as having some really contrasting areas of whites and darks, so there was a lot of room for things to go wrong. Would I be able to create a nice artwork, or was I going to end up with a big grey-brown smudge on my page? Well, there was only one way to find out. After creating that first piece, I had a better idea of what kind of colours I wanted to use. So I placed an order for a couple of extra shades that I thought would make things a little bit easier. I ordered the extra dark burnt sienna and an extra dark Payne's grey to give me a couple of nice dark tones that weren't quite as overwhelming as the black. I also picked up a chromium oxide green, which I think is a nice natural green that was very easy to work with. And I picked up a phthalo blue because, well, it's one of my favourite colours and I couldn't help myself. I'm sure I could have completed this piece without these extra colours, but having them on hand really did make mixing colours a lot easier. Now, the same as I did with my owl, I coloured the eye of the bird first with my colour pencils. This just gave me a really good reference for how dark I needed to go with my pan pastel layer going forward. I find that having those darkest tones down early really helps me get my bearings around the whole piece. And with that eye in place, I was ready to start layering down the base colour for the bird. I started off by using the little applicator that kind of looks like it's meant for eyeshadow to get down those darks on the face and beak. Now, I did find it absolutely impossible to get a defined line for the edge of the beak against that background, and some of the dark pan pastel was sort of flaking off onto that lighter background. So I chose to work very conservatively, keeping my pan pastel well inside my guide lines. I figured I'd be able to use my colour pencils to neaten up this edge on my next layer. I then used a very soft mop brush to just lightly dust off any of the excess dark pigment and took a quick moment to just touch up that background colour. And I must admit I was really surprised at how well that worked. I used that small applicator to lay down the blues and oranges on his face, and I used a separate clean applicator for that little patch of white on his neck. I definitely think it's worthwhile keeping an applicator clean just for the highlights, since the whites are very quickly overwhelmed by the addition of any pigment. With the smaller areas of colour laid down, I switched to the soft knife tool to get down the larger areas of colour, and I was blown away by just how quickly this all came together. In less than an hour, I had my background and blocking in layers completed, and I was ready to move on to adding detail with my colour pencils. I started off with the beak, tidying up the edges and adding details like the nostrils and some shiny highlights. For the feathers, I started off by using my indigo and black pencils to add the deepest colours of those blue feathers. Then I built them up to my brightest blues for the highlights. This ability to use the lights over the darks is my favourite thing about using the pastel matte paper, making the whole process very fast and intuitive. Unlike working on traditional paper where I would need to plan out all of these highlights in advance. I worked this way around the whole piece, adding in my darkest colours to give the bird shape and form, and then adding my lightest colours for the detail. Adding on those electric blues was my favourite part of drawing this piece. These are some of my favourite colours and I don't get to use them anywhere near often enough, but I did have to be a little bit careful to know when to stop adding more. Too much of those light blues would cause me to lose all of my contrast and completely ruin the effect that I was trying to achieve. Finally, it was time to move on to the branch. Now, I was really anxious about this part of the drawing, since this branch was covered in a massive tangled lichen in moss. There was no part part of me that wanted to draw this exactly like my reference photo, since it would be so tedious to get all of those tiny details down. So I just worked at achieving the right textures. The hardest part of this drawing was trying to get my head and my hand around trying to build up the right look to this area. And I did a lot of trial and error, building up colour and knocking it back to get the effect that I wanted. It did take me a while and a fair bit of frustration, but I finally started to see it coming together and start to look like a mossy branch. Sometimes you've just got to keep trying until it looks right. So here's the final piece. I think I say this a lot, but I really like the way this one came together. I was able to get a really clean and bright image, even using those messy pan pastels as a base, and I was able to complete this entire drawing in under 2 hours. If you like this piece, the original is now listed for sale over on my Etsy store. I would love to see this one up on someone's wall. I would just like to take a moment to thank my patrons. I have 2 real-time videos showing the entire piece coming together available for you guys now. I hope you've enjoyed this. Please leave me a like or a comment to tell me what you think, and if you'd like to see some more of my work, then why not hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching, guys.